The iron collar around Sarah's throat had rubbed her skin bloody 3 days ago. She stopped noticing the pain somewhere around the second auction house. Standing on the splintered wooden platform in Varath's central square, she fixed her gaze on the cobblestones below, watching boots shuffle past as buyers circled the merchandise. The autumn wind cut through her threadbare shift, but shivering required energy she no longer possessed. "Lot 17, the auctioneer barked, yanking her forward by the collar chain. "Female, 20 winters, Omega, literate, decent health despite appearances." He forced her jaw open, displaying her teeth like a horse for sale. Previous household service, trained in childcare and nurturing work. The laughter that rippled through the crowd made her stomach clench. "Childcare?" A heavy-set merchant snorted. "What pack needs an Omega for that? Pups either toughen up or they don't survive. Natural order." 60 silver, starting bid. The auctioneer tried, his voice carrying false confidence. Silence. Sarah had learned to read silences in the months since raiders destroyed the Willowmere pack. This one spoke clearly. Worthless. 40 silver, the auctioneer amended. More silence. A woman in the crowd whispered something that made her companions laugh. Sarah caught the words useless and burden before forcing herself to stop listening. "She's gentle with difficult children," the auctioneer added desperately. "Calms the feral ones, the broken ones, has a gift for coddling weakness." Someone called out. "That's not a gift, that's a disease." 20 silver. The voice slithered through the crowd like oil. "And that's generous." Sarah's blood turned to ice. The man who stepped forward wore wealth like armor, fine furs, golden rings, but his eyes held the flat emptiness of a predator who killed for pleasure. His smile revealed too many teeth. "Lord Morcant," the auctioneer said, relief flooding his face. 20 silver is 15. Morcant moved closer, circling her with deliberate slowness. "Look at her. Half-starved, spirit broken. She'll last a season in my kennels, maybe 2. 15 silver, final offer." Kennels. Sarah knew what that meant. The fighting pits outside Varath, where feral wolves tore each other apart for entertainment. Omegas didn't fight. They served other purposes for the handlers between matches. 15 silver, the auctioneer agreed, defeat heavy in his voice. "Sold to Lord Moore." A sound split the air. Not a word, not a howl, something between. A guttural snarl of pure, uncontained rage that seemed too massive to come from anything mortal. Then Sarah realized it came from a child. The crowd scrambled backward as a small form tore through the square, handlers chasing desperately behind. The boy couldn't have been more than 4 winters old, but he moved like a wild thing, snapping and clawing at anyone who reached for him. His eyes were wrong, not the warm glow of a healthy wolf pup, but something feral and fractured, pupils blown wide with terror and fury. "Catch him!" someone shouted, "before the Alpha King sees—" Too late. A ripple of power washed through the square, so absolute it stole the breath from Sarah's lungs. Conversations died. Laughter ceased. Even the feral child froze mid-snarl as a figure emerged from the crowd. Sarah had never seen the Alpha King of Shadowmere. She'd heard the stories. Everyone had. The conqueror who united the northern territories through blood and iron. The wolf who hadn't smiled since his mate died 4 years ago, leaving him with a son who hadn't spoken a single word since. The man who approached the platform now made those stories seem like understatements. He stood taller than any wolf she'd encountered, broad shoulders beneath black leather armor that bore no ornamentation. His face could have been carved from granite. Sharp jaw, blade-straight nose, eyes the color of molten amber that swept across the scene with cold assessment. Power radiated from him in waves, pressing against her chest, demanding submission from every fiber of her being. Emmerich! His voice carried absolute command. Come here. The child, his son, spun toward the sound. For a heartbeat, something almost like recognition flickered in those damaged eyes. Then the boy's lip curled back, a growl building in his tiny chest. He wasn't going to obey. Sarah could see it in the rigid line of his small body, the way his fingers curved into claws. 4 years of silence and savagery had built walls too high for even his father's voice to breach. The pup's wild gaze swept the square, searching for threat or escape, and landed on Sarah. His growl deepened. Every wolf in the crowd stepped back. Sarah did the opposite. She didn't think. Didn't consider the chains binding her wrists or the collar around her throat, or the 100 ways this could end in her death. She simply dropped to her knees, lowering herself below his eye level, and let her body go soft, submissive, safe. It's all right, she murmured, her voice barely a breath. I know. I know it's too loud and too bright and nothing feels right. I know. The growl faltered. You're not broken. She kept her eyes down, her shoulders curved inward. You're just lost. And lost things can be found again. Silence crashed through the square. The pup took one step toward her, then another. His growl had faded to a confused whimper, his shattered gaze searching her face for the trick, the trap, the pain that always followed. Sarah opened her arms. The Alpha King's son, the child no handler could touch, no healer could reach, and no nursemaid could survive, crawled into her embrace and buried his face against her neck. She felt his small body trembling, felt the desperate way his fingers clutched her threadbare shift, and something cracked open in her chest. There you are, she whispered, holding him gently. There you are. When she finally looked up, the Alpha King was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. His wolf-bright eyes burned with something between shock and hunger, his powerful frame utterly still. 1,000 gold. His voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade through silk. The Omega is mine. The journey northward lasted 5 brutal days. Sarah walked at the center of the Alpha King's procession, her bare feet leaving bloody prints on the mountain paths. The warriors surrounding her made no effort to slow their pace or ease her passage. If anything, they seemed to take pleasure in her struggle. Her fingers brushed the small leather pouch hidden beneath her shift, the one thing the slavers hadn't taken. Inside, dried herbs rustled softly. Moon petal for fevers, silverwort for infections, remedies she'd learned helping Willowmere's healers tend sick pups during the winter plagues. Useless skills now, according to everyone who'd examined her worth. But she kept the pouch anyway. Some habits were harder to break than chains. 1,000 gold for that, one warrior muttered, loud enough for her to hear. King's lost his mind. Maybe she's warming his bed, another suggested with an ugly laugh. Though I can't imagine why. Skinny little thing would snap in half. Doubt it. He hasn't touched anyone since the queen died. 4 years of cold sheets. The first warrior spat on the ground near her feet. No, this is about the pup. Thinks this Omega can fix what's unfixable. Sarah kept her eyes forward and her mouth shut. She'd learned long ago that responding to cruelty only invited more. The pup, Emmerich, traveled in a covered wagon at the head of the procession. She caught glimpses of him occasionally, his small face pressed against the canvas gap, watching her with those unsettling, broken eyes. Each time their gazes met, something in his expression flickered. Not warmth, not yet. But not the feral emptiness either. Recognition, the memory of arms that held him gently. On the 3rd night, her legs finally gave out. The ground rushed up to meet her, rocks biting into her palms and knees. She tried to rise, but her muscles had nothing left to give. The world spun in sickening circles. Leave her. The voice belonged to the warrior who'd speculated about her purpose. Dead weight slowing us down. Could carry her, another suggested with mock consideration. Share her between us to lighten the load. Warm ourselves on these cold mountain nights. Rough laughter echoed off the stone walls of the pass. You'll do nothing of the kind. The laughter died instantly. Sarah blinked sweat from her eyes to see the Alpha King standing over her, his towering presence blocking the moonlight. His amber gaze swept across his warriors, and whatever they saw in his face made them retreat several steps. Without a word, he shrugged off his heavy traveling cloak and draped it over her trembling shoulders. Then he crouched, one arm sliding beneath her knees, the other supporting her back, and lifted her as easily as she'd lifted his son. "My lord," she whispered, shame burning her cheeks. "I can walk. I just need a moment." "You need rest." His voice held no warmth, but no cruelty either. Simply fact. Sleep. We reached Shadowmere by dawn. She wanted to protest. Wanted to prove she wasn't the burden his warriors believed her to be. But his arms were steady and warm, his heartbeat a solid rhythm against her ear, and exhaustion dragged her down into darkness before she could form another word. When she woke, she was lying on furs in a wagon, the cloak still wrapped around her, and small fingers were tangled in her hair. Emmerich had crawled in beside her sometime during the night. He lay curled against her side, one fist clutching a strand of her dark hair like a lifeline, his breathing deep and even. Peaceful. The warrior driving the wagon glanced back, his eyes widening. "Don't," Sarah whispered, terrified any sudden movement would shatter the moment. "Please don't startle him." The warrior stared at the sleeping child, the feral prince who'd sent 6 handlers to the healers, and slowly turned back around without a word. They reached Shadowmere as gray dawn bled across the sky. The fortress erupted from the mountainside like a jagged wound, all black stone and sharp angles. Towers clawed toward the clouds, walls bristled with iron spikes. Even the gates seemed designed to intimidate, carved with snarling wolves whose stone eyes followed every visitor. Inside, the courtyard confirmed her fears. Warriors drilled in brutal formations, their movements precise as blades. Pups, some barely old enough to walk, practiced combat forms with wooden weapons, their small faces set in grim determination. No one smiled. No one laughed. The only sounds were commands, grunts of exertion, and the constant clash of training steel. "Welcome to Shadowmere," a voice said behind her. Sarah turned to find a woman with iron-gray hair and a face carved from efficiency. Her eyes assessed Sarah with neither kindness nor cruelty, simply calculation. "I am Marin, head of household. You'll answer to me for daily duties." Her gaze dropped to Emmerich, who still clung to Sarah's hand. "And apparently, for the prince as well, though I suspect that arrangement won't last." "Why not?" Marin's expression flickered. "Because Lord Valdric has other opinions about the prince's care." As if summoned by his name, a shadow fell across the courtyard. The man who approached shared the Alpha King's height and the sharp angles of his features. Clearly family. But where the king's presence commanded through power, this man's demanded through menace. His eyes were pale as winter frost, his smile a thin blade. "So this is the Omega who bewitched my nephew's broken pup." Valdric circled her slowly, his gaze dissecting, knelt in the dirt and opened her arms like a proper broodmare. "Lord Valdric." Marin's voice held careful neutrality. "The king instructed." "I know what my nephew instructed." Valdric stopped directly in front of Sarah, close enough that she could smell iron and something rotten beneath his expensive cologne. 1,000 gold. For a gift with children. He laughed, the sound empty of all warmth. In Shadowmere, we don't coddle children, we forge them. The prince will never become the alpha he was born to be if he's coddled by some Omega nursemaid. Sarah's hand tightened around Emmerich's fingers. The boy had gone rigid, his breath quickening. The prince needs, she began. The prince needs nothing from you. Valdrick's ice-colored stare hardened. Remember that, Omega. Whatever my nephew believes he saw in that square, he was wrong. Softness is sickness here, and I am very good at cutting out disease. He turned and strode away, his cloak snapping behind him. Marin exhaled slowly. I warned you. What is he? Sarah asked quietly, watching Valdrick's retreating form. To the king? His uncle. His advisor. The beta of Shadowmere Pack. Marin hesitated. The man who raised him after his parents died, and the man who believes mercy is merely weakness wearing a pretty mask. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. Stay far from him, girl. If you value breathing, pray Lord Valdrick forgets you exist. 3 weeks passed in Shadowmere, and Sarah learned to navigate its brutal rhythms. Dawn brought the clash of training weapons. Noon brought silent meals where warriors ate with mechanical efficiency. Dusk brought exhausted wolves limping to their quarters, nursing injuries they refused to acknowledge. And every day, without exception, young Emmerich was dragged to the training yards. She watched from the kitchen windows as handlers forced him through combat drills designed for wolves twice his age. He didn't fight back. Not anymore. The feral rage had dulled into something worse. Hollow compliance. He moved through the forms like a ghost, his broken gaze staring at nothing. But every night, he came to her. The first time, Sarah woke to small fingers tugging her blanket. Emmerich stood in the darkness of her tiny servants' quarters, trembling violently, his cheeks wet with tears he couldn't shed and screams he couldn't voice. Nightmare? She whispered. He didn't answer, couldn't answer, but he crawled into her narrow bed and pressed himself against her side. I've got you. She wrapped her arms around him gently, humming a half-remembered lullaby from her own childhood. Nothing will hurt you here. I promise. He fell asleep within minutes. After that, he appeared every night. Always shaking, always silent. Always seeking the only safety he'd found in 4 years of darkness. The other servants noticed. You'll get us all killed, a kitchen maid hissed one morning. The prince isn't supposed to leave his quarters. If Lord Valdrick finds out, he's a child, Sarah said quietly. A frightened child who needs comfort. He's the Alpha's heir. He needs to be strong. The maid's eyes darted nervously. Comfort makes wolves weak. That's the Shadowmere way. But the Shadowmere way was killing him. Sarah could see it in the growing hollowness of Emmerich's cheeks, the way his small body flinched at every raised voice. He wasn't becoming stronger. He was disappearing. The breaking point came on a frost-bitten morning. She was carrying linens across the training courtyard when she heard the sound, a high, keening whimper that pierced her chest like a blade. Emmerich stood in the center of a circle of older pups, his wooden practice sword lying broken at his feet. Blood dripped from his nose. One eye was already swelling shut. Pathetic, an instructor growled, grabbing Emmerich's arm roughly. The Alpha King's son, beaten by pups twice his size. Shift, fight back. Prove you're not worthless. Emmerich's body shook, but nothing happened. His wolf, damaged by whatever trauma had stolen his voice, refused to emerge. Shift! The instructor's hand raised, ready to strike. Sarah was moving before she could stop herself. Don't touch him. Her voice rang across the courtyard, freezing everyone in place. The linens tumbled from her arms. She didn't care. The instructor turned, disbelief warping into fury. What did you say, Omega? I said don't touch him. She stepped between the man and the child, her pulse racing but her voice steady. He's injured. He needs rest, not more beatings. He needs to learn. Pain is the only teacher worth. Pain is teaching him to die inside. Sarah lifted her chin, meeting the instructor's eyes in direct violation of every rule she'd been taught. And when there's nothing left inside him, no amount of pain will bring it back. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Emmerich's arms wrapped around her legs, his small face pressing against her thigh. Not hiding, holding, trusting her to protect him when no one else would. You dare. The instructor's voice dropped to something dangerous. You dare question our ways, Omega. You dare imply you know better than centuries of... She implies nothing. The crowd parted instantly. The Alpha King emerged from the shadows of the covered walkway, his molten gaze fixed on the scene before him. His face revealed nothing. No anger, no approval, no hint of what consequence awaited. My king. The instructor dropped to one knee. This Omega interrupted training. She defied. I saw what she did. The king moved closer, his broad shoulders casting them all in shadow. His gaze dropped to his son, still clinging to Sarah's legs, and something unreadable flickered across his features. The boy is injured, he said finally. Training is finished for today. But my king, the child must learn. I said finished. The alpha command in his voice made every wolf in the courtyard bow their heads. The instructor retreated without another word. Only Sarah remained standing, Emmerich still attached to her legs like she was the only solid thing in his crumbling world. The Alpha King stared at her for a long moment. His expression remained stone, but his eyes burned with something that looked almost like gratitude. Then he turned and walked away, without a word. That night, Emmerich came to her quarters earlier than usual. But when she opened the door, the child wasn't alone. A servant stood behind him, face pale with terror. The Alpha King commands your presence, both of you. Her voice shook. In his private chambers. Immediately. Sarah's breath caught. She looked down at Emmerich, whose small hand had already found hers, and she saw it, the first spark of something other than fear in 4 years. Trust. He trusted her. Whatever waited in those chambers, he trusted her to face it with him. She squeezed his fingers gently. Then we shouldn't keep him waiting. The Alpha King's private chambers were nothing like Sarah expected. She'd imagined cold stone and brutal functionality, a reflection of the fortress itself. Instead, warmth greeted her. A fire crackled in a massive hearth. Thick furs covered the floor. And along one wall, preserved behind glass, hung a woman's gown of moonlight silver, displayed like a sacred relic. The king stood at the window, his back to them, silhouetted against the night sky. He didn't turn when they entered. Leave us, he told the servant. The door closed with a soft click. Silence stretched. Emmerich's grip on Sarah's hand tightened, but he didn't retreat. Something had shifted in him since the courtyard, a fragile thread of courage she was terrified of breaking. 4 years. The king's voice was quiet, rough-edged. 4 years, 17 handlers, 3 healers, 2 shamans from the eastern reaches. He turned finally, and Sarah saw exhaustion carved into the hard lines of his face. None of them could touch him without blood. None of them could make him sleep through a single night. His amber eyes dropped to their joined hands. And then you knelt in the dirt of a slave market, and my son crawled into your arms like you were the answer to a prayer I'd stopped believing in. Sarah's throat tightened. My lord, I only... How? The word cracked like breaking ice. How did you know what to do? What to say? She hesitated, searching for an explanation that wouldn't sound like madness. I didn't know, my lord, I just felt. He was so frightened, so alone. I remember what that feels like. The Willowmere Pack. He'd clearly read whatever records existed. Raiders destroyed them 8 months ago. Yes, my lord. You lost everyone. Yes. The king moved closer, his powerful build blocking the firelight. This near, she could see the shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his jaw. The weight of a kingdom and a broken child slowly crushing him. Emmeric's mother was called Lysara. Sarah's breath caught. The silver gown on the wall suddenly made terrible sense. She died bringing him into the world. The king's voice had gone hollow. There were complications. The healers tried, but his hands clenched at his sides. She held him once, smiled at him once. Then she was gone. My lord, I'm so sorry. He screamed for 3 days after. The king's eyes were distant, lost in memory. Then he simply stopped. Stopped crying. Stopped reaching for comfort and stopped making any sound at all. The healers said his wolf retreated so deep they couldn't find it, that the bond between mother and child had been severed so violently he might never recover. Sarah looked down at Emmerich, who stood silent and watchful beside her. 4 years of imprisonment inside his own grief. 4 years of adults trying to force him into shapes he couldn't hold. They were wrong, she said softly. Were they? His wolf isn't gone, my lord. It's hiding, protecting him from more pain. She knelt slowly, bringing herself to Emmerich's level. Sometimes the bravest thing a wolf can do is wait until it's safe to come out again. Emmerich's wounded eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something beneath the damage, a flicker of the child he might have been, the child he could still become. You're the first person he's touched willingly since Lysara died. The king's voice had dropped to barely a whisper. The first person he sought out. The first person he's trusted. The weight of those words settled over her like a mantle. I won't betray that trust, my lord. No. He studied her face with an intensity that made her skin warm. I don't believe you will. He moved to a side table, pouring wine into 2 goblets with hands that weren't quite steady. My uncle believes I've made a mistake. That softness with the boy will ruin him, make him unfit to rule. And what do you believe, my lord? The question hung between them. For a long moment he simply stared into his wine, the firelight casting dancing shadows across his carved features. I believe my son was dying by inches. I believe I've tried everything else. And I believe... He looked up, his wolf-bright stare burning into hers. I believe you might be the only person in this fortress who sees him as a child instead of a broken weapon to be reforged. Sarah's chest tightened. My lord. You'll continue working with him. Privately. Away from the training yards. His tone shifted back to command, but something softer lingered beneath. I'll inform the household. No one will interfere. Thank you, my lord. Don't thank me yet. He set down his goblet, shadows returning to his expression. My uncle won't accept this quietly. Valdric believes mercy is poison, and he's spent 20 years building Shadowmere on that foundation. His jaw tightened. He raised me after my parents fell to betrayal, taught me that kindness invites destruction. Do you believe that? The question escaped before she could stop it. Sarah braced for anger, for dismissal, for the cold authority she'd seen him wield. Instead, he laughed, a broken, bitter sound. I believed it completely. Until I watched my son die behind his own eyes and realized that cruelty wasn't saving him. It was finishing what grief had started. He crossed to where she still knelt, extending his hand to help her rise. The contact sent unexpected heat racing up her arm. Stay far from Valdric, he said quietly, not releasing her hand. He won't show you the mercy I have, and I cannot always be here to protect you. Where are you going, my lord? Border disputes in the eastern reaches. I leave at dawn. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. Unconscious or deliberate, she couldn't tell. I may be gone several weeks. And Emmerich? Stays here, with you. His golden eyes held hers, and she saw it then, the terror he hid beneath his iron control. Fear for his son. Fear of hope. Fear of what it might mean if she succeeded where everyone else had failed. Keep him safe, Sarah, please. Her name in his voice did something dangerous to her heartbeat. I will, my lord. I swear it. He nodded once, then released her hand and stepped back. The distance felt like loss. Kale. She blinked. My lord? My name. A ghost of something that might have been warmth crossed his features. When we're alone, you may call me Kale. The Alpha King rode out at dawn with 200 warriors at his back. Sarah stood in the courtyard with Emmerich's hand in hers, watching until the procession disappeared into the mountain mists. The boy's grip tightened as his father vanished from sight, but he didn't cry, didn't whimper. He simply pressed closer to her side and waited. He'll come back, she promised quietly. Your father is strong. Emmerich said nothing, but he didn't let go of her hand for the rest of the day. With the king's intimidating presence gone, Shadowmere began to shift. It started small. A kitchen maid burned her hand on a pot and, seeing Sarah nearby, burst into unexpected tears. Not from pain, but from the months of tension she'd been forbidden to release. Sarah held her while she sobbed, and the other servants watched in wary silence. The next day, 2 of them asked if she could help them with something. Then 3. Then 7. Not injuries of the body. Shadowmere's wolves healed those quickly enough, but injuries of the spirit. Exhaustion. Loneliness. The crushing weight of living in a place where any softness was treated as disease. Just talk to us, a young guard admitted one evening. It's been so long since anyone just talked. Sarah listened. That's all she did at first, listened to their fears, their griefs, their memories of what life had been before Valdric's philosophy had stripped all warmth from these walls. And slowly, carefully, Shadowmere began to thaw. She heard laughter in the kitchens for the first time since her arrival. Saw servants pause to share conversation instead of scurrying past with heads down. Watched as the rigid hierarchy of fear softened into something that resembled community. But the greatest transformation was Emmerich. She worked with him daily in the abandoned garden behind the eastern tower, a space so choked with weeds that no one bothered to visit. Together, they cleared the dead growth and planted new seeds. She talked constantly, narrating everything she did, filling the silence between them with gentle words he never returned. Some days he simply sat and stared at nothing. Other days he helped her dig in the soil, his small hands working beside hers, his damaged eyes carrying the faintest light. She never pushed him to speak, never demanded progress or performance. She simply existed beside him, steady and patient, proving through 1,000 small moments that she wouldn't disappear like everything else he'd loved. 3 weeks into the king's absence, Sarah woke to find Emmerich standing at her bedside, clutching something in his small fist. A flower. One of the first blooms from their garden, white petals streaked with pale purple. He held it out to her, his expression uncertain, hopeful, terrified. For me? She whispered, her throat tight. He nodded slowly. It's beautiful, Emmerich. Thank you. She reached out to take it, and their fingers brushed. The boy's lips parted. His chest rose with a shaking breath. And then, a sound. Small, broken, barely a whisper. Sarah. The world stopped. Her breath seized so hard she thought she might shatter. Her eyes burned with sudden tears. "What did you say?" she breathed. Emmerich's lower lip trembled. 4 years of silence. 4 years of walls built from grief and terror. And now, crumbling. "Sarah," he said again, stronger this time. "Stay." She pulled him into her arms, tears streaming down her face, holding him like he was the most precious thing in any world. He clung to her with desperate strength, his small body shaking with sobs he could finally release. "I'm staying," she promised into his hair. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here." When she finally looked up, she saw servants gathered in the doorway, their faces painted with shock and wonder. The word would spread through the fortress within hours. The prince had spoken. After 4 years of darkness, Emmerich had found his voice again. But the joy of that morning shattered before noon. Horns echoed from the watchtower, not the triumphant call of victory, but 3 sharp blasts that made every wolf in Shadowmere go still. Distress, emergency, return. The king's hunting party thundered through the gates an hour later, their wolves lathered and wild-eyed. At their center, carried on a makeshift stretcher, lay a figure drenched in blood. Not the king. Lord Valdric. "Ambush in the mountain pass," a warrior gasped. "Enemies we didn't see coming. The king fights on, but Lord Valdric, the Silver Blades?" Sarah pushed through the crowd. Emmerich clutched against her chest. She saw Valdric's gray face, the black veins already spreading from the wounds in his chest. Silver poisoning, the same death sentence she'd watched claim her own pack's warriors. "Where are your healers?" she demanded. "Dead," the warrior said flatly. "First ones targeted in the ambush." Marin appeared at her side, face grim. "We have no one left who can fight silver poison." Sarah looked down at the man who'd threatened her, who'd promised to cut out the disease of her softness, the man who wanted Emmerich forged through cruelty rather than healed through love. Her enemy. Her fingers found the herb pouch at her hip. Moon petal. Silverwort. The remedies she'd learned in Willowmere, tending sick and wounded pups through long winter nights. "I can try," she heard herself say. "There's a chance." Valdric's eyes snapped open, pale and furious despite his agony. "Don't touch me," he snarled, bloody foam flecking his lips. "I'd rather die than be saved by Omega weakness." "That can be arranged," someone muttered. But Sarah was already kneeling, already pulling herbs from her pouch with practiced efficiency, crushing moon petal and silverwort into a paste. "I don't care if you hate me," she said quietly. "I don't care if you'd rather die. There's a boy in this fortress who lost his mother the day he was born, and nearly lost himself to the grief. He just spoke his first words in 4 years, and I won't let him watch his great-uncle die if I can prevent it." Valdric's winter stare widened. "The boy spoke?" "Her name," Marin confirmed softly. He said her name. Something flickered across Valdric's ruined face. Shock, confusion, and underneath it all, the faintest crack in his certainty. Then his eyes rolled back, and his body went limp. Sarah worked through the night. Valdric survived. 3 days of fighting the silver's spread. 3 nights of forcing bitter medicines down his throat while he drifted in and out of consciousness. But his color returned, his breathing steadied, and the black veins slowly retreated. On the 4th morning, he woke fully. Sarah was changing his bandages when his cold eyes focused on her face. She braced for fury, for threats, for the cruelty she'd come to expect. Instead, he simply stared at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Why?" he rasped. "I told you why?" "For the boy." His voice was weak, but bitter. "Not for me." "Does it matter?" She secured the fresh bandage with careful hands. "You're alive. That's what counts." "It shouldn't be." He turned his face away. Your kind of mercy, it makes us vulnerable, opens doors that should stay locked. Maybe some doors need opening. He didn't respond, but he didn't threaten her either, and for Valdric, that almost counted as progress. The king returned 4 days later, victorious but exhausted. Sarah heard the horns from the garden where she sat with Emmerich, teaching him the names of the flowers they'd planted. The boy's head snapped up, his newly found voice emerging in a breathless whisper. "Father?" "Yes." She smiled, her heart full. "Let's go welcome him home." They reached the courtyard as the king dismounted, his armor dented and bloodied but his powerful build intact. His amber gaze swept the crowd. Searching, she realized. Searching for them. When his gaze found Sarah with Emmerich at her side, something in his expression cracked open. Then Emmerich released her hand and ran. The crowd gasped. The feral prince who couldn't be touched, who hadn't willingly approached anyone in 4 years, sprinted across the courtyard and launched himself at his father. "Father," he said, small and broken and miraculous. "Father, you came back." The Alpha King caught his son, lifting him easily, holding him so tight Sarah thought he might never let go. His eyes squeezed shut, his shoulders shook. And the mighty ruler of Shadowmere wept without shame before his entire pack. Later, after the reunion, after the reports, after Valdric had been visited and the miracle of Emmerich's voice confirmed, the king summoned her to his chambers. "You gave me back my son." He stood before the fire, Emmerich sleeping peacefully in the adjoining room, the first time the child had slept in his own bed in months. His wolf-bright eyes held hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "You gave him back to himself," she corrected softly. "I just stayed." "You stayed." He moved closer. "When everyone else tried to force and fix and control, you simply stayed. You saw him when no one else could." His hand rose, fingers brushing her cheek with devastating gentleness. "You saw me too. Kale. I've been so afraid." The confession seemed torn from somewhere deep. Afraid of wanting things I couldn't protect. Afraid of hoping. Afraid of becoming the man I was before Lysara died, and Valdric convinced me that softness killed her. Did it? No. His forehead dropped to rest against hers. Childbirth killed her. Fate. Cruelty of the gods. Not kindness. Never kindness. His breath shuddered. "You've shown me that. You've shown this whole fortress." Sarah's pulse raced. "I'm just an Omega, a slave you bought at auction." "You're the woman who saved my son's soul." His lips hovered over hers, close enough to taste. "And if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life showing you what that means to me." The kiss, when it came, was soft as snowfall. Then deeper, hungrier. 4 years of loneliness meeting 8 months of grief. 2 broken people finding wholeness in each other's arms. When they finally parted, breathless and trembling, Sarah saw her future written in his golden eyes. But that future shattered 3 nights later. A servant shook her awake, face pale with terror. "The prince is missing. Lord Valdric says he knows where the boy went and requests your help to find him." Sarah's blood ran cold. Something felt wrong. Deeply, terribly wrong. "Where's the king?" "Council meeting in the Eastern Tower. Valdric said not to disturb him. Said you could handle it quietly." Every instinct screamed danger. But Emmerich, her Emmerich, who'd just found his voice, who trusted her completely, was missing. She followed the servant through darkened corridors, descending stairs she'd never seen, until they emerged in a torchlit chamber deep beneath the fortress. Valdric waited alone. No Emmerich, no guards, just ice-colored eyes gleaming with something that looked horribly like satisfaction. "Where is he?" Sarah demanded. Where's Emmerich? Safe in his bed. Valdrick smiled. Sleeping peacefully. He was never missing at all. The door slammed shut behind her. You saved my life, Valdrick continued, circling slowly. I've spent days trying to understand why that fills me with such rage, and I finally realized it's because you've proven everything I believe is wrong. Valdrick, 20 years I've shaped this pack. 20 years of cutting away weakness, of forging strength through suffering. And you undid it all in a matter of weeks, with nothing but gentle words and open arms. His voice cracked. My nephew looks at you like you hung the stars. The boy calls your name in his sleep. Even the servants smile now, as if joy were something they were allowed to feel. Those are good things, Sarah said desperately. Can't you see that? I see corruption. He drew a blade from his belt, silver-edged, glinting with oily poison. I see a disease that must be cut out before it destroys everything I've built. He lunged. Sarah screamed, and the chamber exploded into chaos. The king burst through a hidden passage, his roar shaking dust from the ceiling. He'd followed her, somehow known, somehow sensed the trap. His powerful frame slammed into Valdrick, sending the poisoned blade spinning across the stone floor. You dare! Kale snarled, his wolf surging beneath his skin. You dare threaten her in my own fortress? I dare because no one else will. Valdrick scrambled upright, another blade appearing in his hand. You've forgotten what we are, nephew. What we must be. She's made you weak, and weakness will... The king struck first, but Valdrick had trained him, had shaped every combat instinct the Alpha King possessed. The fight was brutal, evenly matched, blood spraying across ancient stone. More guards poured in, some loyal to the king, others to Valdrick's poisonous ideology. The chamber became a battlefield. Sarah pressed against the wall, helpless, watching the man she loved fight for both their lives. Kale was winning. Slowly, surely, his superior strength overwhelming his uncle's experience. Then Valdrick stumbled backward, defeat clear in his pale gaze. I'm sorry, nephew, he whispered, and drove his poisoned blade into his own chest. Kyle caught him as he fell, confusion replacing fury. Uncle. But Valdrick's dying hand shot up, a third hidden blade piercing the king's side before anyone could react. My legacy, Valdrick gasped, bloody smile spreading, will outlive us both. He went limp, and Kale collapsed into Sarah's arms, silver poison already spreading through his veins. They carried him to his chambers, Sarah never leaving his side. The poison worked fast, faster than it had in Valdrick. The blade must have been coated with something stronger, something designed to kill. Quickly and absolutely. Black veins spread beneath his skin like dark rivers. His breathing grew shallow, labored. His amber eyes, when they opened, were clouded with pain. Sarah, he breathed, I'm here. She pressed her hands to the wound, reaching for her herb pouch, willing her knowledge, her desperate love, her very life force into fighting the poison. I'm right here. Don't you dare leave me. Emmerich is safe, sleeping. He's going to wake up tomorrow and you're going to be there. Tears streamed down her face. Do you hear me, Kale? You're going to be there. She worked through the night. Every herb she knew, every remedy her pack's healers had taught her before they died. She packed the wound with poultices, forced antidotes between his cracked lips, and when medicine failed, she simply held him, pouring her heart into his fading body. Stay, she begged silently. Stay with me. Stay with your son. We just found each other. You can't leave now. His heartbeat faltered. His breath stopped, and Sarah screamed, a sound of pure anguish that echoed through the fortress. Then, a flutter. Weak, uncertain. But there. His chest rose. His eyes opened. Sarah, her name on his lips, rough and broken and alive. You impossible man. She collapsed against his chest, sobbing with relief. Don't you ever do that again? His hand found her hair, fingers tangling in the dark strands. Couldn't leave, had promises to keep. Dawnlight crept through the windows, painting the chamber in shades of gold. Kale's color slowly returned, the black veins retreating, life flowing back into his powerful frame. When Emmerich appeared in the doorway, small face tight with fear, Sarah opened her arms. He ran to them, climbing onto the massive bed, burrowing between his father and the woman who'd saved them both. Father's hurt, Emmerich whispered, still miraculous, those words from his lips. Father's healing, Kale corrected, his voice gaining strength, because of Sarah, because she refused to let the darkness win. Emmerich looked up at her with eyes that had lost their fractured emptiness. Sarah saved us? She saved everything. Kale's hand found hers, squeezing gently. She saved this whole fortress just by being brave enough to be soft in a world that told her softness was weakness. It's not weakness, Emmerich said firmly, an echo of words he'd heard her say 100 times. It's being brave enough to feel things. Sarah laughed through her tears. That's right, little one, that's exactly right. The weeks that followed transformed Shadowmere completely. With Valdric gone, the fortress exhaled decades of tension. Warriors who'd hidden their gentleness now showed it openly. Children laughed in the training yards between combat drills. Music filled the great hall every evening, and the gardens Sarah had planted with Emmerich bloomed throughout the grounds. The Alpha King ruled differently now, still strong, still commanding, but tempered with mercy that made his people love, rather than simply fear him. You've changed everything, he told Sarah one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. We changed together, she corrected. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. Then let's make it permanent. The mating ceremony took place beneath the full moon. The entire pack gathered in the courtyard. Sarah wore a gown of silver and white, a gift from Kale that made her feel like the queen she was about to become. But the moment that shattered her heart and rebuilt it happened just before the king marked her as his mate. Emmerich stepped forward from the crowd, his small face solemn and certain. Sarah? His voice carried clearly across the silent courtyard. Yes, sweetheart. He took a shaking breath, 4 years old, still healing, still finding his courage. Then he spoke the word she'd never expected to hear. Mama. The courtyard gasped, Kale's arms tightened around her, and Sarah dropped to her knees, pulling the boy into an embrace that held all the love her heart could contain. Yes, she whispered through tears. Yes, my brave boy, I'm your mama. Forever. When she rose, Kale's molten gaze glistened with unshed tears, the mighty Alpha King undone by a single word from his son. My family, he said, voice rough with emotion, my heart, my home. Under the silver light of the moon, he marked her as his mate, a gentle bite that promised forever. And in the years that followed, Shadowmere became known throughout the territories not for its cruelty or its strength, but for something far more powerful. A fortress where broken things were healed, where lost children found their voices, where an Omega slave and a grieving king built a family from the ashes of their sorrows, and where love, soft, stubborn, unrelenting love, proved stronger than any weapon ever forged.